and welcome to Your Choice 2020 General Election coverage on HOMTV. I'm Janelle James, and joining us for this candidate interview is Carol Siemon, Democratic Incumbent Candidate for Ingham County Prosecuting Attorney. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this time, we would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you, Janelle. It's a pleasure to be here. Doing this by Zoom is a new experience, so I'm never quite sure where to look, so I apologize. I'm looking at Janelle in the box. I'm the prosecutor of Ingham County, was elected in 2016, and I'm currently running for re-election.
Each Ingham County Prosecuting Attorney candidate will be asked a standard list of 10 questions. Let's get started with question number 1. Explain how your education and professional background makes you an ideal candidate for a county prosecutor.
Thank you, Janelle. Well, first, I was born and raised in Lansing, so I have spent all my life, except 3 years of law school here in Ingham County, and really understand the dynamics of our community. I also have been a lawyer for 39 years now, and I spent over 11 years in the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office in the 1980s and 90s, where I had over 100 jury trials and extensive experience in almost every aspect of the office. I then went to the Prosecuting Attorneys Association in 1995, where I developed their child abuse training program. I won't go through every single job I've had in the 22 years I was outside the prosecutor's office, but I was a legislative bill drafter for the Legislative Service Bureau. I worked for Michigan State University School of Social Work with their Chance of Childhood program. I worked with the Office of Children's Ombudsman, investigating CPS and foster care activities, worked with the State Court Administrative Office as the Deputy Director of Child Welfare Services, was recruited to work with the Department of Health and Human Services as the Director of the Child Welfare Training Institute, and also worked with Public Policy Associates as a Senior Policy Consultant working on juvenile justice and race equity issues. So and I've been the prosecutor since 2017, elected to the elected position in 2016. So I obviously now have extensive experience as the elected prosecutor.
Describe your greatest adversity or failure in the courtroom and how you overcame it.
Well, inexperience was certainly my greatest challenge in the courtroom. I had my first jury trial in 1983, 1 week after I started at the prosecutor's office. I was nervous and scared. I over-prepared. I wrote out every single question that I was going to ask the jury, every witness. I wrote out my opening statement well in advance. And that preparation was really important, but it was later, as I had over 100 jury trials in district, circuit court, and now what's family division of circuit court, that I became comfortable in the courtroom and was able to be more flexible and nimble and not feel that need to over-prepare. So that was a very useful growth in my career. But one of the most important things I learned early in my career was to listen to the voices of others. That wasn't something we were taught in law school. I learned specifically from young people in the court system when they were referring to programs that involved services for foster youth, the phrase, "nothing about us without us." And one of my biggest lessons has been to learn and relearn that it's the people who are most impacted by our systems who can teach us the most about how to improve those systems.
Question number 3. What do you think are the top 2 services or assistant programs the prosecutor's office offers that need the most attention to provide the biggest benefit for residents? How do you plan to enhance those services?
Well, since I've been the prosecutor, I have worked on enhancing services in a variety of areas. The 2 that I would talk about are victim services, which I think are the most critical function of any prosecutor's office. I've enhanced services by hiring an additional grant-funded witness coordinator who has taken on some responsibilities that allow our victim specialists to focus more on working with victims. We've now allowed people to check online for court appearances instead of just a telephone hotline to make it easier for people. We have a closer collaboration with community-based organizations working with domestic violence like CARE and EVE. I actively participate in groups like Capital Area Sexual Assault Response Team. I've implemented training to better understand the needs of victims, including persons with disabilities or other special needs. We've obtained grant funding for an additional prosecutor to work with domestic violence victims and work with a new district court domestic violence accountability process for those committing domestic violence. We've expanded our Crimes Against Children's unit, and also with technical assistance from the Prosecuting Attorneys Association, implemented a new adult sexual assault victim practices for better practices, worked with the Attorney General to create a sexual kit initiative project to address the old rape kit backlog cases and to bring charges in old cases. Worked with the Canine Advocates of Michigan and community partners to bring a support dog to our office to reduce stress and anxiety for victims who may be discussing the worst events of their life. And Corey's been a real boon for all of us at the office too. And I support the ability of my coworkers to both attend trainings and to share their own considerable experience to help train others, which benefits the victims in our community. The second focus has been being smart on crime by collaborating with law enforcement, community mental health, substance use disorder treatment programs, and using recommendations from our Community Corrections Advisory Board to divert cases completely from the criminal justice system when possible. I work with a variety of efforts to expand mental health assessment and treatment needs, substance abuse treatment, etc. When a case does get referred to our office, we refer many individuals to our diversion program, which has been working with clients since the 1970s to avoid criminal charges and convictions for many types of offenses. We work with our relatively new public defender's office to gather information about defendants as early in the process as possible to develop a plea offer or other recommendations to provide a sensible, proportionate response to the offense. I've evaluated practices and developed new policies to appropriately hold offenders accountable while not seeking the harshest penalties possible. We consider collateral consequences to defendants, such as immigration consequences or a possible loss of a job or an occupational license, so that we try to right-size our response to what the person did wrong, but not overcharge or oversentence. We have many specialty courts in Ingham County that provide treatment and accountability, and more have developed during the time I've been prosecutor, and we're involved with those. We partnered with the Supreme Court last fall to hold an expungement clinic so that those who have paid their debt to society have an opportunity to clear their criminal record for certain offenses. And I support using appropriate bail bond conditions instead of cash bail. I support most of the recommendations of the Governor's Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Detention to reduce incarcerations that have been shown to be linked to poverty or racial disparities, such as driving while license suspended when that suspension is due to unpaid fines or other reasons not related to bad driving. Driving while license suspended for unpaid fines is one of the top reasons persons end up in jail, and that ultimately does not serve anyone well.
In light of recent events surrounding police brutality and demonstrations across the country, what is your stance on police reform in Ingham County and the state of Michigan?
Thank you. I supported police and community justice reform when I ran in 2016, and I continue to support it. I was actually asked by HOMTV in 2016 if I would prosecute a police officer, and I gave an example of a sexual assault case against a police officer I did prosecute in the 1980s. Just like I, as a lawyer, have a license I must maintain, I believe that police should be held to high standards. I emphatically do not support abolishing police, however, as some have advocated, but I just as emphatically support adequately funding social services, healthcare, education, housing, and other efforts to support communities. The events of the last few years, and certainly since the George Floyd murder, have shown a very bright light on many places in our police and criminal justice system that need improvement. I believe that our entire culture suffers from systemic racism, and that while most of us are good people working in good faith, the institutions themselves are built on a history of racism. That means we need to be thoughtful and aware to look at what our implicit biases are, where they may come from, and how to correct them. We have to be willing to not be defensive, but to be open and curious, even when we feel attacked. Simply being reactive or blaming, no matter what our perspective is, isn't helpful. I support reviews by external agencies for use of force by police. I support having more citizen oversight of police and increased transparency for the public. I don't have a specific model in mind, but I agree with suggestions by the governor and the attorney general and AG. I respect our local police agencies and their general openness to take a new look at their policies and practices.
Please comment on how you believe local law enforcement agencies should approach new or continued diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, our local police departments have been actively recruiting to hire officers who more completely reflect the composition of our communities. They hold recruiting events, have more extensive training, et cetera, and try to just be more active, involved in the community. Through a partnership with MSU School of Criminal Justice, scholarships can be awarded to encourage women, persons of color, and persons with diverse backgrounds to attend local colleges or police academies and firefighter training. I think that locally recruiting a diverse police force has been a goal for many years, but it hasn't been easy. And right now, trust for police is at a low point. And persons who could substantially add to diversity and quality of our police departments are often looking to other career options than law enforcement. Our local police and I participate in a group, a monthly meeting started by the Michigan Department of Civil Rights in 2016 called Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust. LPACT is a vital part of this process to build trust, but only one piece of the necessary conversation. Trust is a fundamental issue, and if the community does not have trust in the police, they often will not be willing witnesses or otherwise help solve crimes. The system has to both feel and be fair and just to get the buy-in from the community to achieve public safety.
What is your approach to addressing major topics of concern in Ingham County, including but not limited to human trafficking, sexual assault and domestic violence cases, the opioid epidemic, and gun violence?
Thank you. Well, human trafficking, I served on the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force, participates in training to expand our knowledge and expertise. Our goal is to have a victim-centered and trauma-informed approach that both identify sex and labor trafficking up front so we can take appropriate legal action. We also participate in the Family Division of Circuit Court's Phoenix Court, which was developed by a former judge, Laura Baird, who recently retired, that works with youth at high risk of being trafficked. With sexual assault, in addition to what I described earlier, I've been working with survivors of sexual assault, including a Nassar survivor, to develop a cross-professional training to teach us how to better respond to victims and their actual needs in a skilled and sensitive manner. I also work with a consortium of service providers, law enforcement, and others to try to promote culture change with the general public. The criminal justice system often re-traumatizes victims by a lack of understanding of the dynamics of sexual assault. One of our barriers remains the myths that the public often believes about sexual assault victims. As someone who's been involved with prosecuting sexual assault since the 1980s, it is very distressing to see how victim blaming and archaic views still are barriers to many victims being believed by juries and obtaining a measure of justice. And it remains one of the most frustrating aspects of my job. With domestic violence cases, we've had a lot of efforts that I've highlighted above, but we've also had to address the increase in domestic violence during the pandemic, which along with child abuse and gun violence, unfortunately, has gone up. Besides those aspects I mentioned earlier, we've begun a countywide domestic violence fatality team review where law enforcement, prosecutors, advocates, and state experts meet and review cases of domestic violence that have led to death to look for areas where we can do better, from perhaps legislation to reducing access to guns, to providing more safety options for persons who are at risk. The opiate epidemic, substance abuse is first and foremost a public health issue, even when it leads to behaviors that traditionally are addressed in the criminal justice system. The Ingham County Opiate Addiction Prevention Initiative is a local effort begun by the Public Health Department to look at the issue through a public health lens with harm reduction as a major focus. In my office, I've expanded the traditional role of our drug prosecutor to also encompass working with addiction and prevention issues. We're part of a collaborative effort for a federal grant Building Bridges program to divert more persons with opiate issues from jail to treatment. And my drug response attorney went to Washington, D.C. as part of a local team pre-COVID to learn best practices when dealing with persons with opiate issues. We're involved with the drug courts in Ingham County, including the Family Courts Treatment Court that works with parents with addiction issues. Gun violence is a huge issue. I created a new special assignment last year to specifically focus on all aspects of gun violence. I have an assistant prosecutor who works closely with law enforcement to identify and provide targeted prosecution of individuals causing the most harm in our community. He's also in the process of being cross-designated as an assistant U.S. District Attorney to further our state and federal response that allows us to prosecute cases where it's most effective. One of the most exciting partnerships in which we're involved is a violence interruption program that the Ingham County Public Health Department, really a leader, we have a great health department, has been exploring to adopt a well-researched model to actively work within the community with persons who have real-life experience with gun violence. These persons, called credible messengers, intervene in a whole new way than we've tried before. Advanced Peace has been very successful in communities with similar issues and demographics as Lansing. Advanced Peace, Ceasefire, Cure Violence, and similar programs are helping keep people alive and reduce gun violence in communities where they're being used. The focus is on forging meaningful relationships and creating new skills for people to be able to step back and pause in their behaviors instead of reflexively shooting. Lansing, like most urban areas across the nation, has seen a rise in gun violence during COVID, and this is a way to hopefully reduce it. We also need legislation to help get guns out of the hands of persons causing domestic violence with what are called red flag laws. I support a ban on assault weapons and don't believe they should be readily available. Safety measures to protect children from having access to guns, including guns owned legally by adults, needs to be promoted. Too many children die because adults do not lock up their guns in gun safes or use gun locks, which are readily available. Gun suicides are astonishingly high, and gun violence is simply one of the most serious issues confronting our county.
What is your opinion on the quality of youth correctional programs and juvenile justice in Ingham County?
Juvenile justice has been one of my career focuses, and I support the juvenile court mandate of rehabilitation as the primary goal. I served on the state committee on juvenile justice for 6 years and also as a senior policy consultant with Public Policy Associates, as I mentioned, working on juvenile justice and race equity issues. I was also chief of the Ingham County Juvenile Division for 4 years in the 1990s. I'm a fan of our juvenile justice system response in Ingham County. The voters have supported juvenile justice with a millage for a long time, and we have effective and innovative programming. Our court works closely with MSU for both services and data analysis to continually look for what is working, what is not, and what are promising new practices. The court has diversion services through MSU, works with the teen court program for certain kinds of offenses, utilizes restorative justice practices through Resolution Services Center to both hold some minors accountable, but provide resources to rehabilitate. The court offers group treatments for youth and supports for families of offenders, which is critical. The Ingham Academy is a certified charter school and provides meaningful educational opportunities for youth who might otherwise be suspended from our local schools. I made a policy decision right after I took office in 2017 that all cases where a juvenile might be waived, transferred to adult court must come to me for a review first. Our numbers of waivers to adult court have dropped significantly and are reserved for individuals for whom the juvenile justice system really has no alternative. I support the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court Miller decision that ruled that juveniles should not be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole due to their immature brain functioning. One of our local juvenile life without parole cases, was paroled in 2018, and he recently successfully completed parole. This is a young man who 30 years ago was going to be spending the rest of his life in prison. I stand with the research that demonstrates that most offenders age out of offending, and only very rare offenders need the very lengthy and punitive sentences that are typically imposed in the United States.
What improvements, if any, would you like to make involving mental health cases and resources?
Well, there are many areas needing resources. It's one of our hugest issues nationally. In our state, our state systematically defunded programs beginning in the 1990s. And while the original goal of returning people to the community for treatment instead of locking them up in institutions was good, the reality is that community services have never been funded as they need to be. We have an excellent Clinton Eaton Ingham Community Mental Health Board that is creative and very skilled, but they simply don't have the funding and never have had the funding to provide all the services that our community needs. And it creates service gaps that are problematic. For me, in the criminal justice system, I've also seen that years of inadequate funding for our forensic center has created huge backlogs on getting necessary evaluations for defendants needing competency and criminal responsibility exams. This often results in people sitting in jail for months or even years, awaiting evaluations or needed treatment. Jails and prisons have become our default mental health institutions for far too many, and that's pathetic. So first and foremost, adequate funding from the state is needed. We have many officers well-trained in crisis intervention team training, which is an excellent first step. We have one social working with the Lansing Police Department, and she has made a huge difference. But we need far more community, street-level outreach workers to respond to mental health needs. East Lansing is adopting some new models, utilizing social workers and trained community outreach workers, and that's good. But I believe that to reduce the use of the criminal justice system to address mental health needs, we must actually fund our mental health system adequately. Until we do, we're using the less effective means of the criminal justice system to deal with what fundamentally should not be a criminal justice system response.
What do you believe are the biggest challenges facing the prosecutor's office now and in the future?
Right now, it's hard to not say. I mean, I have to say that COVID, it's created huge challenges with case backlogs, providing services, and ultimately our budget. We've done an excellent job at working remotely whenever possible, using Zoom and remote technology to continue doing hearings with court and interact with victims and witnesses, and learning new ways to meet the needs of the public. And some of these tools that we've learned during COVID will continue to use once the most onerous parts of COVID have lifted. But there's been no question that COVID has been the single biggest challenge this year, and it will continue to be. I'm grateful that I have so many wonderful coworkers. They work so hard and they support each other, and we couldn't do what we're doing without the incredible efforts. We're also fortunate to have a supportive board of commissioners and county leaders. The office suffered big staff losses in 2009 due to the recession of 2008-2009, and has never fully recovered due to the ongoing budget issues with changes with how pensions were funded to our current budget difficulties dealing with COVID. Everyone has been trying to do more with less for a long time, and it really isn't a sustainable practice.
What will be your top 2 priorities if elected as county prosecutor?
Well, I am the county prosecutor, and when re-elected, I'll continue our data collection and analysis efforts. That doesn't sound very exciting, but it's with good data analysis that we can continue to identify what our gaps are and how to address them. We were selected in February by the Vera Institute of Justice, so just a national leader in working on issues of incarceration. is one of 3 national new data projects for this year. They've worked with other jurisdictions before, called Reshaping Prosecution, to work on efforts to reduce mass incarceration while also keeping our communities safe. We have reduced prison incarceration by 27% since I've been in office. But what we found is that the proportions of persons of color, especially Black persons, is still the same. So we obviously still have some issues that we really have to figure out. So this summer, due to our ongoing commitment and efforts, they asked us to be one of 3 pilots for a brand new project called Motion and Justice, which is designed to do a deeper dive into race equity issues. We begin a 6-week training tomorrow and have a work group within our office to guide our efforts. We're working with the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan to gather data from available sources and have created an extensive data spreadsheet with over 50 data points that help us understand our demographics, our charging, plea, and sentencing practices, how we handle referrals to diversion, especially courts, probation, and more. It's really by seeing what we do now and where some of our inadvertent unfair practices may be that we can really craft policies and practices to change them. My second major focus moving into my second term will be to continue to work as a leader in criminal justice reform. I serve on the Prisons and Corrections Council for the State Bar of Michigan, on the Victim Services and Corrections Committees for our statewide Prosecuting Attorneys Association, and was recently elected to serve on our statewide board of directors. I'm also active with the National Prosecutors Center for Excellence and also a network of reform-minded prosecutors called Fair and Just Prosecution. I've been privileged to have opportunities to learn from international experts and those doing cutting-edge work in criminal justice reform. As recent events have highlighted, prosecutors have great power within the criminal justice system to effectuate change. Law enforcement, the defense bar, courts, community members, legislative bodies, and training entities all are critical components in the progress and the process of change. But prosecutors wield a huge amount of discretion and authority. Decades ago, I studied policy and political theory at James Madison College at Michigan State University, and my commitment to use research, rigorous examination, and thoughtful consideration of the process of government and justice remains with me today.
With the few minutes remaining, we would like to give you an opportunity to make a closing statement.
So I didn't prepare a closing on purpose because I wanted to be able to just respond spontaneously. It's been an incredible privilege to be the Ingham County prosecutor for the last almost 4 years now. I brought all my years of experience doing work in all 3 branches of state government and really trying to have a holistic network to create a new way of doing prosecution. I have great respect for the traditional role of the prosecutor, which is to try to utilize charging decisions to both restore justice for victims and protect our community. But we have seen that doing things the same way over and over again is not leading to the better results that we need. And we have amazing opportunities in this time of crisis, both with COVID, with all of the accountability issues that have been put in our face by George Floyd and many of the other cases going back years that have really shown us that what we're doing has not worked well for a vast majority of our community and that we need to do a better job. And I'm thoroughly committed to being that holistic prosecutor who is really trying to be part of a community, to heal a community, to have a community that takes care of itself and reduces violence due to really effectively dealing with the underlying causes that lead to many of our criminal justice problems in our society.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for watching this candidate interview with Carol Siemon, Democratic Incumbent Candidate for Ingham County Prosecuting Attorney. I'm Janelle James, and I'm inviting you to watch live general election coverage Tuesday night, Tuesday, November 3rd, right here on HOMTV. Thanks for watching.